Big hand please for Michel Reilhac.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to be in this very prestigious institution with you. Now, just a very quick word. I come from the exact same world as yours. I was head of cinema commissioning editor for ARTE for Cinéma between 2002 and 2012, and most of my job meant that I needed to choose films that we would co-produce, and I did that for about 30 different features from all over the world each year. So during the course of my stay there, I was involved in over 300 feature films, independent feature films from everywhere. I'm saying this because as I was doing this job, as I was researching new talent all over the world to produce their films, I ran across a new breed of artists who were exploring interactive storytelling. I thought that was really intriguing back in 2005, 2006 when I started meeting with them. It grew on me, it grew to the point where I saw this as an amazing potential for telling stories, and I decided in 2012 to resign from my job at ARTE. I thought after 10 years of doing this, that was enough, and I needed a new challenge, and this new challenge was to explore interactive storytelling as a writer, as a director, and as a producer. And very quickly, after I moved out of ARTE in the beginning of 2013, that's when Oculus, the company that started this new trend with contemporary VR, started their Kickstarter campaign for crowdfunding. And I had been in touch with VR back in 1992, the first time when I curated a show in France where I invited an artist from New York, Matt Mullican, who at the time already was using virtual reality as a mean for his work. So I kept in touch with VR, but when I saw the Kickstarter campaign from Oculus, that goes back only 4 years ago, not even, yeah, 4 years ago, I thought, now this is moving quickly, this is moving to a completely different place. And when in March of 2014, Facebook bought Oculus, this company that was started by a 16-year-old teenager for over $2 billion, I thought now we're really talking in a change of paradigm. As much as I remain a huge fan and a huge lover of what I call now flat cinema, sorry, this is not a pejorative word, it's just a way of distinguishing what you experience on a rectangular screen from what you experience in a sphere around you. As much as I remain a huge fan of cinema, I've become a passionate advocate of virtual reality, and the two can work hand in hand. I experienced when I was in the world of film, of traditional film, I experienced what it meant to apply the rules of filmmaking and then transgress them, try and invent new ways. Yeah? You don't like my mic?
Yes. You should take that one, because then also our Facebook users can hear you.
Okay.
For some reason.
So I found very quickly that what's wonderful is that VR is not here to kill cinema or to replace film. It's going to be just like video, just like television, a new kind of experience, a new kind of way of telling stories using moving images and sound. So it's not about saying stop making flat films because VR is coming and forget about the old ways, the new way is coming. Not at all. It's just another kind of experience. And as such, I think that filmmakers are storytellers first. And as storytellers, watching the rise of a new art form like VR is a golden opportunity to just widen the scope of what you can do. So this is not about this talk that I want to share with you is not about trying to convince you that something new is coming on the horizon and you need to stop doing what you do. No, you need to continue doing what you do. You just need to know that something else is coming. And this something else uses most of the same rules that you've learned doing film, making cinema. This talk that I want to share with you is about some lessons I have learned in the process of transitioning from cinema to virtual reality. I've chosen 10 lessons and that are specific to virtual reality, but they take for granted that you can use almost all of the lessons you are learning about making films on a rectangular screen. So let's start once that has been said. The first lesson that I've learned, and which is so obvious that it almost goes without saying, is that story always comes first. And it's not because you're going to be telling a story in VR, a bad story in VR, that magically it's going to become successful and effective. You always need to have a story. But in VR, there's an exception. Is that whatever the story you're choosing to tell, it always has the same character popping up. It's the viewer. You have to now take into account your viewer, your spectator, because your spectator is no longer outside somewhere watching your film comfortably seated on a cinema theater chair. Your viewer is now at the heart of your storytelling experience. The fourth wall has been broken and you have placed your viewer as a participant of your story world. He or she is no longer outside, protected of the fiction world that you're telling. So the challenge is, how do you script the place, the action, and the uncontrollable freedom that your viewer has within your story world when your viewer is free to look around and move around within your story world. You cannot predict and you cannot control what that person will be doing within the sphere of your story. So you need to learn how to script that presence. This is something I have shared today with the workshop at MIT that I call presence design, and it would take very long to go into details of this, but this is one of the most challenging aspects of writing a story for VR today, is designing the presence of your viewer. Since I, the viewer, am here at the heart of your story, who am I? How should I be planned? How should I be designed? This is an essential new craft that is being explored as we speak by VR storytellers. Second lesson, which seems totally obvious, is to switch from thinking rectangles, as we've been told, from the dawn of the attempts of mankind to represent nature, to represent the world. It's been done on flat surfaces. It's been done through paintings, it's been done through photography, then through cinema, television, and now the computer screens. So we don't realize it, but everything we think when we think representing the world, we think it in rectangles. And to give that up, to start thinking in spheres, is not as obvious as it sounds. It's a trigger you need to activate, and you need to start seeing the world, the images that you're going to share with your audience, in spheres and no longer in flat surfaces. a lot of people coming from the film world say, well then, the job of being a director is dead. There's no need for a director since there's no need for a point of view. Since I'm showing everything, what should I do as a director? Because my job up until now was to choose a window on the world, compose that window, frame it, and then play with it, paint it, so that I can share it through a film. And so if I don't have to choose that window on the world, then what am I supposed to do? There's no job left for me. Well, no, that's completely wrong. It's not because you're widening, in a way, the frame of what you're representing to the point where the frame becomes 360 degrees in every direction, that you have to give up your responsibility to choose what is it that you're showing, to choose where your camera is going to be, and to choose the action within it. It's exactly the same thing, and the point of view remains just as necessary from an artistic standpoint in VR as it is in rectangles. But the reason why we think that it doesn't work this way, because the limits of the frame are expanding, is just an automatism that we have in our minds because we've been so conditioned culturally to think rectangles. And if you start giving that up and saying, okay, I'm not going to think rectangles anymore, I'm going to think spheres, that problem goes away. But it's a trigger, and it's not always easy. I just want to share with you one example of one of the first films that I did. I apologize for those that are sensitive, but it's quite sexual. It's called Vient. It was premiered in Sundance. Not this one, but the Sundance before. And I just want to share it to show that it is an example of thinking sphere and all around. The other thing that you will see is not obviously a 360-degree representation, it's the flat representation. And I take that opportunity to also say that this is one of the training you need to acquire if you're going to work in VR. You need to train your mind to watch a flat rendering of a sphere, which means that images are completely distorted at the bottom, at the top, but it's the only way to see the action in your sphere at one eye shot. So you can see how the arm here is completely distorted because in the image, this performer is right under me. In the last shot where you see this total wall carpeted of bodies, just to explain, this was an experiment in trying to see what does it do to be in a sphere where I will be entirely surrounded by bodies all around me. In making this experiment, we had to render the effect on a computer that took over 48 hours to render just that scene, which lasts 15 seconds in the film, and the computer burned. It actually physically burned after 48 hours of trying to render the effect. Fortunately, technology in VR is going really, really quickly, and now you have all kinds of different softwares that allow you to skip that and do almost real-time rendering of the most, of the heaviest effects that you can try and do. Third lesson, which is once again among the things you need to learn from, which is specific to VR, which you cannot transport from your knowledge of cinema to VR, is the fact that you have to hide everything. Because in 360 degree, everything is filmed by the camera, right? So if you're, I was once in a scene on a VR film that we had to shoot in the desert, and we were totally unprepared. We had not thought about where are we going to hide. When you're in a forest, like I did one scene of a film here in Tiergarten, it's full of trees. All the technicians were hiding behind a tree or lying behind a bench, and so it's easy, you can hide, and that's fine. But when you're in the desert, where do you go? There's no place to hide. We had to go and buy shovels, and we had to dig holes in the ground so we could hide in the holes, so we wouldn't be seen. But the same goes with lights, for instance. I'd like to show you just one excerpt of a film that I shot here in Berlin with VR, a company based here, and we had to. It was a night scene, and we had to hide the lights. I wanted to be able to stop it, to freeze it, but I will do it differently.
Come on, show us what you got. Show us what you got.
I don't know, but there's no light up there in his flat, so he must be coming down.
He's coming down, but it's very slow.
Very slow?
Very slow.
So, two things I wanted to use this example for. This is again a flat rendering of the scene. As you can see, there is light. There is light here. There's light here, and we needed to light the scene because it's a night scene. We chose two options to hide the lights. This is a rather theatrical setting. We used the fact that there were street lamps in the street to disguise some of our theater projectors as street lights. So here, this is a projector hidden in the trees, and this is another fake street light. But here, this area is lit by a non-existing light. So in order to do this, we had to use a system called clean plating. Clean plating means that we actually had a projector that was sitting here lighting this area. So we filmed the whole scene with this projector standing there. When the scene was finished, we didn't touch anything, we didn't touch the camera. We took out the projector from here, so there was no light here anymore, but we refilmed the whole scene the same way. And then in post-production, what we did, this was shot with 12 cameras on one rig, and what we did in the post-production is that in this scene where we had the light here, we replaced that one camera. Let's say that the one camera was filming here. We took the frame from the other shot when we had taken the light out. So this is a combination of actually two different takes. One with the light here, and one without the light. Hope I'm making myself clear. This is called clean plating, when you're replacing one or two camera shots by the one that has been taken without the technician, or without the prop, or without the light. The other thing I wanted to share, but I don't know if, because I thought I could, I wanted to...
Come on, show us what you got. Show us what you got.
I don't know, but there's no light up there in his flat, so he must be coming down.
He's coming down, but it's very slow.
Very slow?
Very slow.
I just wanted to show... I just wanted to show you one example of the mistake we had, which is called the problem of stitching, and many of you know about this, but this is one of the challenges that we still have, although we have software to fix it. Stitch lines are the lines between the different cameras of a rig that combines from 2 to 32 cameras. The lines between each camera is what we call a stitch line. Oh, you managed to stop it? Oh no, it's because I made a shorter version. Anyway, let's see if I can show. There's a stitch line here. We align the cameras so that the stitch line would be along this line, because it's always easier to fix a problem of stitching when it doesn't match exactly, when nothing is moving. But this actress is right in the middle of the stitch line, and you can actually see it here. It's dark, so you can't really see it, but here is a bad stitch, because it's not good. There's like a break. Her back is like this, and you can also see that there's a difference in the light. It shouldn't be like this. You can't really see it here. When she moves back and sits, you can see that her arm is sort of broken in two pieces. That's a stitching issue, and that's still one of the main problems we have technically in VR, which is being solved by more sophisticated softwares. So I just wanted to use this to illustrate some of the technical issues that we're still faced with. Erasing what we don't want to show, making sure you remember that you're shooting, you're filming everything that's around, and stitching issues that are very specific to VR. Fourth lesson, I found that VR provides you with incredible opportunities for a viewer's experience to play with space, to twist space. To do that, I want to use one example, which is this choreography by Johan Bourgeois. With this is a trailer for the choreography. There should be sound. Oh, but I turned it. So this choreography is a huge success. It goes around, and I have been asked to put together a VR project around this choreography and invent a way of filming this choreography from as a VR experience. So I wrote a fiction actually around this piece, how this piece was an instrument to revive the energy heart of a steampunk interstellar ship lost in space. Anyway, I won't go into details, but it's a far-fetched story for a very, very beautiful choreography. And as we were filming this, we filmed a prototype, a pilot for it. We started playing in post-production and seeing what we could do. I was not satisfied with what we had done. I felt we were too outside of the choreography. And then by accident, we made a mistake and we found this. So this is the filming in VR. And we found that we could do an inverse space where you can actually be at the border between the two spaces, the upper space, and for those of you who are watching Stranger Things, the upside down. So this is just a mock-up, but I'm going to be using this mistake that we did, and we're going to transform the VR experience of the choreography as a game between the passage between these two different levels of reality, and we're going to play with this. This is, of course you could say, well, I could do this in film. This is not specific to VR, right? but it is in the sense that it will give me physically an impression, it will give me an experience which is something I could definitely not have from a flat rendering or during the performance. Just because, remember, that one of the main quality that VR provides is immersiveness, which creates presence, which creates empathy. And this is what you get in film on rectangular surfaces using your imagination. But in VR, not only can you use your imagination, but your brain on a neurological level is tricked to believing that what you're watching is actually the truth, because it is disconnected from another physical environment. The brain is tricked into thinking that whatever you feel in VR is the truth, is reality. This is why the neurological dimension of the experience in VR makes the immersiveness of the experience far superior and far more physical in a way than the imaginatory dimension of the experience from a flat screen. Fifth is redefining the point of view. As I said before, we still, as directors, we still have a point of view in VR by choosing where we place the camera and who we are. This is another project I'm working on, also connected with dance. I used to be a dancer in the past, so I'm very committed to dance as much as I am to cinema, and in VR it's the same. I'm really passionate about studying the connection between dance and VR. This is another piece. It's a very iconic piece of modern dance. It's called Maybe by choreographer Maggie Marin from France. And she's going to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of this particular piece. And I'm right now being consulted to see what could we do with this piece in VR. Let me show you an excerpt of the piece. So in this piece, which I know I've seen a lot, I'm asking myself the question now, what can I do with this piece? The obvious answer in VR is to say, well, I'm just going to give the audience the experience of being in the middle of the dancers, or to be one of the dancers, because obviously this is a point of view which is completely different from watching a choreography from a theater seat, right? But I'm trying to find other ways to make VR more relevant. And the way I'm thinking now is that we can, in VR now, we can explore different point of views, and we don't need to be systematic about sticking to one point of view and, for instance, watching the piece only from within the group of dancers, or putting the camera on the head of one of the dancers and experiencing the dance as if you were dancing it. This experiential nature of VR gives you more freedom, more choices than you have in film, because the end result for the spectator will be experiencing, once again, almost physically, at least neurologically, what you are providing as a point of view. For those of you who have not yet experienced VR, it may be difficult to understand, because I think it's only when you've started watching films in VR that you can really understand, whether you like it or don't like it, you can really understand the difference in nature of the VR experience. Let me add to this that a lot of people who do not like VR or do not like VR yet object to the fact that the definition of the image is really bad, and they are right. It is true that today watching a film in VR is not by far comparable to a film experience. First, you have a uncomfortable sort of mask on your head. Some people feel that they look stupid when they have it, and they don't want to watch VR because they think it's going to mess up their hair, it's going to mess up their makeup, and it's going to make them look stupid. And then, if you accept to watch it, then the quality of what you're watching into it is bad. It's very pixelated. It just doesn't compare with the quality of a film image. But we need to remember that this technology is only 2-3 years old, and we already have the new technologies of building the image directly on your retina with a technology that instead of having a screen close to your eyes, you have 1.5 million micro mirror chips that are sending the pixels directly onto your retina, and the image is reconstructed directly on your retina. I've seen this with the new Glyph headsets, and the quality of the image is totally unbelievable. It corresponds to a pure 4D image on a pixel screen. So the point of view that you have needs to be thought of as an experiential point of view. This is another example to illustrate this, another dance example. I'm asked by the Merce Cunningham company to see if we can do something in VR, because there's a big film that is being prepared on the work of Merce Cunningham with 3D. And we're talking about what could we add to the film as a VR experience. Just as a reminder, this is an excerpt of a piece by the Merce Cunningham company. So in this case, a lot of effort is going to go into filming the dances themselves in 3D with highly sophisticated equipment for a flat rectangular screen. So I've decided in this case that I would not go into trying to film the dance itself because that would be done with highly sophisticated equipment, and I didn't think that the VR experience would add anything to it. Instead, what I suggest we do is to only film the dancers off stage after rehearsals or during rehearsals, when they are resting, when they are worn out, when they are warming up, so that without any kind of text, without any kind of voiceover, we will have a privileged access to that moment where the bodies of the dancers and their personalities are showing off not as performers, but as human beings, and provide access to this privileged moment that we cannot access anytime because it's a very intimate moment, understanding the human dimension behind the aesthetics of the performing artist, and particularly with the Merce Cunningham company, where the body is treated almost as an abstract element, as something almost dematerialized. This is also something you could do in film. You will say there's nothing special about it for VR, except once again that in VR I have this empathy dimension that I can create, and the proximity, the intimacy of the relationship I can build through VR, because it's very physical, is highly superior. The camera is a major issue in VR, because you're not using just one camera, you're always using a set of cameras, a rig. And in this case, you need to understand where you're going to place it and how high you're going to place it. How close can your actors come to a camera? Just let me give you an example of the difficulty of thinking camera rig instead of camera. Close-up. You cannot think close-up anymore, because if I tell my actors or an actor to come close to a camera, first they're going to need to respect the minimum distance that the camera imposes. Right now, the best cameras impose a distance of not more than 60 centimeters. You cannot come closer than 60 centimeters to a camera if you want to avoid issues of stitching, big issues of stitching. You cannot do a close-up just because if an actor is going to come close to the camera, to a rig at some point, you're not sure that your viewer is going to be watching that close-up. Maybe they're going to be watching the other side and watching birds in the sky at that moment. So the notion of close-up, for instance, which in film is a way to create a connection with the performer, create an intimacy, create a bond in a way with the character, that notion cannot be used in VR because you're never sure yet that your viewer will be focusing on this at that moment. So the camera that you're choosing becomes something completely different. This is the camera I'm using at the moment, and it's more a robot than a camera because everything is done through the computer interface. It's really a little guy that you have a real connection with. It's very interesting that the whole crew on set has a completely different connection with this object than you usually do with a camera, a film camera. You start interacting with the camera, as we will all do soon in the future with the robots that are going to start populating our lives. So that creates a different connection with the production of images, including for actors, for performers. It's interesting to see that most performers who start acting for VR have a real hard time with the feeling that they're not being seen, because there's not one eye watching them, but there's a little guy that they're not sure is watching them. That creates a real difference. For instance, if you want your character, the performer, to establish a connection with the viewer, where you want the character to really look at you in the eye, you the viewer, when you will be in the heart of the sphere, you have to make sure that your performer is not looking at the head of the little guy that looks so human like this. When you look at this guy, you look at its head. But in the viewer's experience, the gaze of the performer will be blurred because the performer is not looking at you in the eye, because it's looking at something slightly bigger. So it's a very disturbing kind of gaze, because you want the character to establish a connection with you, the viewer, but in fact his gaze is like someone who's on drugs or someone who's drunk. You need to tell your performers, don't look at the camera's eye, look at this camera, look at this eye, because this is the camera. And this is the camera that is closest to being in front of you. So connect with the camera, not with the head. This is a detail, for instance, of one way your relationship to the camera becomes completely different from a traditional camera. This is the future, as clumsy and scary and backwards as it may look. This is the future of VR. This is what we call light field camera. It's an array of 95 cameras which scan more than they film, which means that in the next generation of VR, we're going to be able to move in what we call a room scale environment. Let me just very quickly illustrate what I mean. In the first generation of VR, if I have this object in front of me, like this, and I want to move closer to it, the whole thing is going to move with me. If I want to come closer to it, it's going to move and keep the same distance with me because I'm in the middle of a sphere where I can move around like this and look. But if I want to move, the whole sphere around me is going to move with me. In room scale, which is the second generation that CGI allows, computer-generated images allow you to do room scale, not yet in full live action. When I move towards the thing, I really move towards the thing. It reproduces the movement I have in the physical world within the virtual world. This may seem simple, it's incredibly difficult technologically speaking, and we're just in the middle of prototyping technology called light field, which is like this. This is the first camera that exists that allows this. When you film a piece with this, you can actually create a scan of your characters and your set. Let me show you just, let me show you just a quick example. Oh no, we don't have Wi-Fi here. Okay. Because I didn't connect. It doesn't matter. We don't have much time. You can watch it online with Lightroom. There's a lot I would like to share with you, but we only have a few minutes left. The seventh lesson is interactivity. Interactivity is the next step for VR. Not only are we going to be able to reproduce movement from the physical world into the virtual sphere, but we're going to now be able to interact with the virtual environment using our body movements. This is being done already with the handheld devices you can get with the HTC Vive headset, with the Oculus, and with the PlayStation VR. But very soon we're going to have much more sophisticated gadgets that will allow us to reproduce touch, for instance. It can go from gloves that are quite simple like this, spider gloves. This is a prototype, but there are all kinds of prototypes being made that can reproduce the sense of touch and pressure in VR, to full jackets that are already available that can be connected and synchronized with the VR space and allows you to feel shocks or pressure, to very crazy kind of hardware that are being experimented with. This is just pointing in the direction that as a scriptwriter, as a storyteller in VR, we are going to be confronted with this incredible challenge of how do you script interactivity to that level within a story. How do you script something that you cannot control, which is your viewer's behavior? This is why I can only strongly recommend that we as people from the storytelling world start looking very closely at what happens in the game world. In the game world, people are used to writing situations where there's full freedom given to the player, but it's a controlled freedom. It's a freedom within a limited number of possibilities, and I do think that the borders between storytelling and game are going to start blurring more and more, and we're going to see games with a lot more storytelling inside, with more psychological developments, hero's journey, things like that, and we're going to start seeing stories with game elements in them. I'd like to show you this example of a game that goes towards storytelling, but mostly this game shows one of the also tricky challenges of reproducing traveling in VR without leaving your room.
Hi again, VR fans. They call me Tomak. And in this video, you will see me fighting against dragons, spiders, and other enemies of the game Elder Scrolls V Skyrim.
Here you see what he's seeing in his headset. He has two hand control devices that he has set up to be an a bow and arrow. He has movement tracking pads under his socks, so the blue disc allows the system to track his movement and his speed. So in this way, you can solve the problem of traveling as far as you want without leaving your room, and we're going to see more and more of those devices. I can almost hear your minds saying, well, this is all fine, but he's just showing us like the crappiest examples of storytelling, because this is really terrible in terms of stories. But it is because the commercial side of VR is so big that the experiments are all being done and the investments are all being done on things that can sell on mass markets. But I'm also, aside from running a VR production company in Amsterdam, where I live now, I'm also curator of the new Venice Biennale VR competition, and I watch a lot of VR stuff, and mostly what I'm interested in is artistic VR. I don't show this kind of things. But I just want to say that what's interesting, maybe among you, there are film fans who know Tsai Ming-liang, who is a Taiwanese independent director. I showed his first VR film, which was an hour long in the competition, in the VR competition in Venice, and he is doing the exact same kind of style of films he's doing in flat films, he's doing in VR. Laurie Anderson just produced and directed her first VR movie as well. The director of Gomorrah has also produced the first episode of the series in Italy in VR. More and more filmmakers are now doing VR films. So it's not only this kind of game designers that are looking into VR. I wanted to just quickly go over the idea of how do you write a VR script. I wanted to find a theoretical way, a system by which you can write scripts. And so I started with this concept that in the middle I could have the camera position, the blue ring would be the inside of the space where I could position my characters, and outside would be the outside world which could be the outside beyond a room that you can see through the windows, or in this case through the windows of the minivan that you saw earlier. This was done at that time. When I tried to share this with the team, no one understood anything, so I realized this was crap, it didn't work. So very quickly I moved to something much less attractive, but much more effective. This is the drawing of the scene you saw earlier. This is the van, this is the street, this is the sidewalk and the building. And this here is the stitch line at the time when we were trying to work with a 2-camera rig. The camera is here and the characters are here. So this was very easy for the crew to understand. So I decided then that's what we need to do. We need to find a system where we can use a mock-up of the set and then place the action in it. So this is something we used at Submarine for Ashes to Ashes, one of the VR productions we did last year, where the characters are listed, all the characters are color-coded. So on the left page of the script, you have a mock-up of the script, of the set, and then color-coded, you have the movements of each character during the scene, which is on the right page of the script, where you have the 1-minute scene with all the dialogues, and the dialogues are also color-coded so that they correspond to these colors, and you can keep track of the action, the dialogue, but also the placement in space. This requires a very close collaboration between the director and the writer, because a lot of those decisions need to be made by the director hand in hand with the writer. One before last is like, once again, VR is an experiential medium, so you need to think about the experience first and think that what your viewer is going to experience in VR is almost physical, as I said. Let me share with you an excerpt of The Void, which is probably the most experiential place in VR today.
Holy cow!
It's really just hard to kind of like even put into words. Walking around a game world is something I've never done. Like actually walking around, it's kind of like, oh!
Everything around you looked very, very real.
Oh my goodness, this cave is super cool.
What in the world?
Like I passed a torch to it at one point.
There were times where like I literally forgot I was in a game.
It's epic.
Yeah, it's like.
So what are they talking about? They're talking about their experience at The Void. The Void is the first entertainment VR theme park. And basically you put up those headsets, the haptic jackets, everything, and then you start walking through a physical space that is reproduced in VR, but with all of the setting around it. This is the promotional trailer that they have. once again, I apologize for the, how could I say, the heavy-handedness of the stories that are being performed in this. This is not what I designed, this is not what I fight for, but this is where the investment is going, and it's up to us as independent filmmakers to sort of hijack these techniques, hijack these investments in VR and make it our own so that we can give it poetry, we can give it meaningfulness, empathy, and artistic and poetic value. So at the moment, there's almost no content made in this artistic sense because it's such a massive investment. We're talking billions of dollars being invested in VR, and those investors are expecting to recoup their investment. That's why most of the trailers, most of what you see is that kind of stuff, real mass market things. But it's really interesting to see that now the software and the equipment are more, are cheaper, are easier to access, and we can now use them to create independent content. I wanted to add, to finish by this quote of being patient. Why? This is because we live in a time where science fiction has become so sophisticated, so rich, such a prolific genre that it has pre-seen, it has foreseen all of the progress that we have within our technological society. And now, when there is a technological innovation, we expect it to perform at the level that we've seen in movies. No, it's really true. This was not the case when cinema was invented. When the first screenings happened at the end of the 19th century, it was a novelty and no one knew what to expect, and everyone was surprised because there was nothing to compare it with. But today we have seen films like this one.
Okay, Jet, was haben wir? Einen Doppelmord. Ein Mann, eine Frau. Der Mörder ist männlich, weiß, in den 40ern.
Zeig mir den Sektor, wir sind unterwegs. Ich verhafte Sie wegen des zukünftigen Mordes an Sarah Marks. Gebt ihm ein Z an.
Die Zukunft ist vorhersehbar.
Wir haben nichts weiter als die Bilder, die Sie produzieren. Wir sehen, was Sie sehen.
Nicht ein Mord in 6 Jahren. Es gibt keinen Fehler im System. Es ist perfekt.
Perfekt, so ist es.
Morde können verhindert werden.
Perfect, so ist es. This is exactly what we expect. The minute, for instance, Minority Report is a standard in science fiction and has established a reference for technology today. And when we see VR, we want it to equal the level of sophistication that we've seen in Minority Report or in any other science fiction movie. We've become incredibly impatient and intolerant for mistakes and for things that are not perfect technologically speaking. Therefore, it's such a challenge when you're a pioneer in a new art form like this to explain that you need to be patient because it just takes time and you need to make your mistakes and you need to make your trials. I want to end with this graph that you have probably seen. It's called the Gartner Hype Cycle, which is something you can apply to any innovation, any new technology. And each year, the Gartner Institute publishes the new cycles per industry. This one represents the emerging technology industry, and it shows how it shows how when something starts here, no one knows about it. The expectations are zero on the scale of expectations. If it's well promoted, the expectations grow very quickly to reach a peak of overinflated expectations, where you think this technology is going to be the one that's going to solve everything. But by nature, those expectations are going to be disappointed. They're going to be deceived. And so, at that point, as you reach the summit of expectations, you're bound to fall back in the trough of disillusionment. here, because the expectations placed in any new stuff is going to be disappointed. So you fall back, and that's where augmented reality is at the moment. So virtual reality has now started its climb upwards to the plateau of stability, where all of a sudden the new technology that came out here went through the rise and fall, now can be a part of the landscape. And that can be applied to literally everything. What's interesting in this hype curve is that they're keeping track of all of the new stuff that comes up, and see where it's positioned. This rise and fall being mostly the effect of media, word of mouth publicity, and overinflated marketing efforts. What starts here is the reality of the potential of the innovation. If an innovation makes it out of the trough of disillusionment, then it's on its way to becoming part of the landscape. This is what happened with the internet first bubble in 2000. You may remember that there was a lot of expectations into the internet, lots of investments, and it just exploded. And everything collapsed, and lots of people said the internet will never happen. It is happening because it went through the bubble exploding here and then rebuilt itself slowly to now having become the first industry in the world. So it's interesting to see where virtual reality is and that it takes time. And this one last slide is just to show the future of where we're going. There's a consensus now in the world that it's not a question any longer whether virtual reality is going to be part of our world or not. The question is, how long will it take until it invades our lives? There are lots of financial groups that are researching the field to see how much they can advise their customers, their investors, to invest in virtual reality. This is one of them that was published recently, and that shows that in 2025, the business of virtual reality will be absolutely huge. This represents roughly the total investment in the television industry and some of the cinema combined. What's interesting, and this is why VR is going to be part of our future, whether we like it or not, is not just a media applied to telling stories. It's going to impact all of our lives. If Facebook has purchased Oculus, it's because they're migrating their services to VR as we speak. You may have seen this public presentation of Mark Zuckerberg showing how we can now access VR if we have an Oculus through the Facebook Spaces app, where you can be up to 5 people represented in the same space through your avatar. You can play, you can work, you can share videos and do all kinds of things in VR. Social networks embracing VR are going to make it more and more popular. But there's already a lot of interest and use of VR in healthcare, engineering, and real estate. I'm in touch right now with major groups in the fashion industry who absolutely want to see how they can use this, if only in streaming the fashion shows. Sports is a huge part of it. Live events is mostly composed of sports events and concerts. We are here in what we call video entertainment, meaning telling stories.